Interrelationships and dependence. Now, symbiosis is an ecological relationship between organisms of two different species that live in direct contact with one another. And these relationships have evolved over millions of years. In some cases, the two species' metabolisms are complementary, and the co-evolution of adaptations is essential because a change in one partner is likely to affect the survival of another. There are two categories of symbiosis, the first one being parasitism. A parasite benefits in terms of energy or nutrients, whereas its host is harmed by the loss of these resources. The next is mutualism. Both mutualistic partner species benefit in an interdependent relationship. In terms of parasitism, a relatively stable relationship has evolved and a balance exists between the defense mechanisms used by the host and the damage inflicted by the parasite. Now, parasites often have limited metabolisms. For example, tapeworms, they lack a digestive system and they absorb the host's digested food. The adults cannot survive outside the hosts. Now, the most effective parasites don't cause the death of the host, perhaps up until the end of the parasite's life cycle. Parasites like Plasmodium, which causes malaria, and the liver fluke and tapeworm feed inside the host. Plasmodium lives in the bloodstream, as does the liver fluke. And here's the tapeworm that lives in the guts of its host organisms. Some parasites, such as aphids, fleas and mosquitoes, live and feed outside the hosts. Here's a flea living on the skin of one of its hosts, a mosquito drinking its host's blood. Now, parasites can be transmitted in a variety of ways, using direct contact, resistant stages and vectors. In terms of direct contact, for example, head louse, head and body lice are passed from person to person by direct contact. Often the release of resistant stages is included in its life cycle, which are able to resist adverse environmental conditions for long periods until they come into contact with a new host. For example, the life cycle of a cat flea. The adult flea feeds on the cat, lays eggs. These eggs hatch to produce the resistant larval stages that can be lost from the cat and survive for many months up until another host comes along. And the resistant pupal stage can survive for another year until it comes into contact with a new host and can then transform into an adult again. Use of vectors. Mosquito being the vector, which carries Plasmodium, which is the unicellular organism that causes malaria from human to human. Some parasitic life cycles involve a secondary host. In direct life cycles, the eggs are shed and passed to a new member of the host species, and it involves one species of host only. However, more highly evolved is the indirect life cycle, where there's a primary host in which the parasite undergoes sexual reproduction, and it also has a secondary host. Now, the new primary host becomes infected when it's invaded or consumes the infected secondary host, and this kind of indirect life cycle is found in organisms such as tapeworms that live and feed inside the host. So, for example, if we look at the tapeworm life cycle very briefly, the human is the primary host, the pig is the secondary host. Here's an adult tapeworm growing inside the gut of the human with its head buried inside the gut wall. Egg cases, a long chain of egg cases being produced behind the head, which contains fertilized eggs, and these egg cases pass out in the feces, which at certain times used to be eaten by animals such as pigs, and the embryos are transferred in the bloodstream of the pig to its muscle tissue, in which it becomes a resting stage called the bladder cyst. When these bladder cysts are eaten by the human, they hatch, and the head of the tapeworm buries itself into the gut wall and becomes an adult and grows egg cases again. Using second or maybe third hosts is complicated, and such relationships evolve by natural selection over millions of years. Now, if we look at mutualism now, several examples. Cellulose digestion in herbivorous animals. Because mammals do not possess the means by which to digest cellulose from plant material, they need mutualistic gut bacteria to do that for them. The microbes make the enzymes which digest the cellulose into simple sugars, and you also convert that sugar into other metabolites required by the animal. But the microbes themselves receive protection, warmth, and a constant supply of food inside the guts of the mammal. Now, of course, for cows and sheep, this is of great economic importance. In coral polyps, you have a mutualistic relationship with a unicellular alga called zooxanthella, found within and between its cells. There's the green alga growing within the coral polyp there. Up to 80% of the sugars made by the alga is used by the polyp, and of course the alga from the polyp will receive nitrogenous waste and a place to live. Finally, lichen, a structure consisting of algae and fungal cells. The alga receives nutrients from the fungus, and the fungus receives sugars from the photosynthesizing algae.